She's not dead, prisoner interrupts billionaire's funeral to save her. What happens next will leave you speechless. The cemetery stretched silent under gray clouds as California's elite pressed shoulder to shoulder in designer black. At the center, suspended above freshly turned earth, hung a platinum casket worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. Inside lay Victoria Chun, 42, founder and CEO of Chen Technologies. Her porcelain skin looked peaceful, almost translucent. Cotton plugs filled her nostrils. Her chest lay perfectly still. Beside the casket stood Marcus Chun, Victoria's husband of 15 years, dabbing his eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Behind him, Dr. Richard Sterling adjusted his designer glasses, the family physician who'd signed the death certificate just 36 hours earlier. The pastor cleared his throat. Ashes to ashes. Stop. Every head turned. Phones rose instinctively. At the cemetery's edge, a figure emerged wearing prison orange. The man moved fast despite ankle shackles, his chain scraping pavement as two correctional officers scrambled after him. He was maybe 35, Latino, with a number stenciled across his chest, 4847B. She's not dead, he said, voice cutting through the chaos. Don't you dare lower that casket. Marcus stepped forward, his polished grief cracking into rage. Security. Remove this lunatic. Now. But the prisoner planted himself at the grave's edge, breathing hard. My name is Carlos Reyes. I was working the prison landscaping crew today. He pointed at Victoria's still form. That woman is alive. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Dr. Sterling moved forward, his voice smooth as oil. Sir, I understand grief makes people see things, but I personally examined Mrs. Chun. She suffered catastrophic heart failure. Because you gave her something, Carlos interrupted. Something that mimics death. Slows the heart to almost nothing. Makes the body cold. He locked eyes with Marcus. Accept someone who knows what to look for. Marcus's face went white, then red. How dare you? My wife is gone. Check her wrist, Carlos said to the crowd. Put your hand on her chest. Feel for warmth. She was poisoned with a paralytic agent. Probably tetrodotoxin or something synthetic. It's in her system right now, shutting down her voluntary muscles while keeping her brain alive. She can hear us. She's screaming inside that body, and you're about to bury her conscious. A woman in the front row swayed. Another covered her mouth. Dr. Sterling forced a laugh. This is absurd. Where would a prisoner even learn? I was a paramedic, Carlos cut him off. Before I went to prison. 10 years on emergency response. I've seen this exact presentation once before. He turned to the crowd, desperate. Please. Give her the antidote. Atropine, maybe neostigmine. You have maybe an hour before her brain damage becomes permanent. Marcus lunged forward. Enough. This man is a convicted felon. I'm a felon who saw something, Carlos shouted back. Yesterday. In the prison library. Your doctor was there for a health inspection. His eyes found Dr. Sterling. You left your briefcase open. I saw papers. Medical supply orders. Tetrodotoxin synthesis notes. A schedule that said Victoria, Tuesday, quick burial. The silence turned electric. Dr. Sterling's smile froze. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. And in that moment, something shifted in the crowd's energy. A tall woman stepped forward from the family section, Victoria's sister Margaret. If there's even a chance. Her voice cracked. If there's any possibility my sister is alive in there. There isn't, Marcus snapped. Margaret, don't let this criminal manipulate. But Margaret moved to the casket. Her hand trembled as she reached for Victoria's wrist. She's warm, Margaret whispered. Then louder, she's warm. Oh God, she's warm. Chaos erupted. People surged forward. Marcus grabbed Margaret's arm. Of course there's residual heat, it hasn't been 48 hours. Check her pupils, Carlos called out. Use a light. If they react even slightly, she's alive. Someone produced a phone flashlight. Margaret pulled back Victoria's eyelid, hands shaking. The pupil contracted. Just barely. Just enough. Margaret screamed. Not from horror, but from hope so violent it sounded like pain. Marcus's mask shattered. "No," he breathed. "No, no, no." He reached for the casket lid, as if to close it, but 3 men grabbed him. His voice rose to a shriek. "She's dead. The doctor said she's dead." Dr. Sterling backed away, his face the color of spoiled milk. His hand moved toward his jacket pocket. "He's got something," Carlos shouted. "Don't let him." But the doctor pulled out a syringe, filled with clear liquid. "Stay back," he said, his voice now jagged with panic. A security guard tackled him. The syringe flew, shattering on marble. And as Dr. Sterling hit the ground, papers spilled from his jacket. Medical documents. Bank statements showing wire transfers from Marcus's offshore accounts. And a small vial labeled, tetrodotoxin synthesis, stable for 72 hours. The evidence lay scattered like accusations across Victoria's grave. Marcus was screaming now, being restrained by 4 people. "It should be mine." She promised it would be mine. Margaret knelt beside her sister, tears streaming. "Get an ambulance. Someone call 911. Please God, please." And Victoria's finger twitched. Just once. Just enough for everyone to see. The crowd exploded into prayers, shouts, chaos. But Carlos just closed his eyes, whispering, "I saw it this time. I didn't let it happen again." Because 3 years ago, before prison, he'd lost someone the same way. A patient he'd been sure was alive, but the doctors had overruled him. He'd watched them prep the body for burial. And later learned she'd woken up in the morgue, alone and terrified, before dying of exposure. He'd failed then. Spent 3 years in prison for assault after beating the doctor who'd ignored him. But not this time. This time, he'd spoken up. This time, someone had listened. If you're gripping your seat right now, wondering what happens when Victoria opens her eyes, hit that subscribe button. Because what comes next will prove that sometimes the truth lives in the most unexpected places, guarded by the most unlikely heroes. The ambulance arrived within 8 minutes, sirens cutting through the cemetery's silence. Paramedics swarmed the casket, their practiced hands moving over Victoria's body. "Pulse is there," one called out. 40 beats per minute. Breathing shallow, maybe 3 breaths per minute. Pupils responsive, but sluggish. He looked up. "This is induced. Someone did this to her." They lifted Victoria onto a stretcher and loaded her into the ambulance. Margaret climbed in beside her sister, gripping that still warm hand. As the vehicle pulled away, the crowd remained frozen in the aftermath of impossible truth. Marcus sat on the ground now, held by security guards. His expensive suit was grass-stained. His perfect hair hung in his face. Gone was the grieving husband. What remained looked feral, cornered. "You don't understand," he kept saying. "You don't understand what it's like. Living in her shadow. Being Mr. Victoria Chan." No one answered. They just stared. Dr. Sterling sat 20 feet away in handcuffs, his designer glasses cracked, blood trickling from where his head had hit marble. Police had arrived minutes after the ambulance. Now they collected evidence, bagging the shattered syringe, photographing the scattered papers. Carlos stood apart from it all, still shackled, still flanked by correctional officers who no longer seemed certain whether they were guarding a prisoner or protecting a witness. A detective approached him, a woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair. "Mr. Reyes. I'm Detective Sarah Morrison. You just stopped a murder." "Not yet," Carlos said quietly. "Not if she doesn't wake up. The paramedics think she will. They're taking her to Memorial. They'll administer the antidote there." She paused, studying him. "How did you know? Really?" Carlos looked at the open grave. "I've seen this before. 3 years ago. A patient came in, suspected overdose. Heart rate was almost undetectable. The attending physician called it. Time of death, 11:47 p.m. His jaw tightened. "But I knew. I knew she was still there. I begged them to try atropine. They said I was being irrational." "What happened?" Morrison asked. "They prepped her for the morgue. I tried to stop them physically. Got arrested for assaulting a doctor." His voice went flat. "She woke up 6 hours later, alone in a refrigerated drawer. Died of hypothermia and shock before anyone found her. The hospital settled quietly. I got 3 years. The detective's expression shifted. So when you saw those papers in Sterling's briefcase, I knew I was looking at murder disguised as medicine. Carlos met her eyes. And I couldn't let it happen again. Even if nobody believed a convict. I had to try. Morrison nodded slowly. Then she lowered her voice. Marcus Chun has been under financial investigation for 8 months. SEC suspected insider trading, possible embezzlement from Chen Technologies. Victoria was about to freeze his access to company accounts. Her lawyers filed the paperwork last Monday. She glanced at Marcus, now being loaded into a police cruiser. He stood to lose everything in a divorce. But as her widower, he'd inherit 70% of her estate, plus controlling interest in the company. And Dr. Sterling? Carlos asked. Marcus's college roommate. Also deeply in debt. We found communications between them going back 6 months. Morrison pulled out her phone, showed him screenshots. They planned this carefully. Sterling prescribed Victoria medication for anxiety, actually gave her small doses of the paralytic to build up her tolerance. Then Tuesday night, he administered the full dose during a routine checkup. Called the death at 9 p.m. Rushed cremation was scheduled for tomorrow. Carlos's hands clenched. They were going to burn the evidence. Along with Victoria. Morrison's voice carried cold fury. If you hadn't been trimming hedges today, if you hadn't seen those papers yesterday, if you hadn't risked everything to speak up. Across the cemetery, investigators photographed everything. Someone found Marcus's phone, unlocked it with his face while he screamed protests. The messages they discovered painted a picture of conspiracy so calculated it felt obscene. Marcus to Sterling, 3 weeks ago, she's meeting with divorce attorneys Friday. We need to move up the timeline. Sterling to Marcus, the compound is ready. Undetectable in standard autopsy. Mimics cardiac arrest perfectly. But we need quick burial. Can't risk detailed toxicology. Marcus to Sterling, what about the paramedic scenario you mentioned? The one who suspected this before. Marcus to Sterling, he's in prison. Even if he somehow knew, who would believe a convicted felon? The irony burned through the investigation like acid. Who would believe a convicted felon? Everyone, as it turned out, when the truth was carved into evidence too clear to deny. A news van pulled up to the cemetery gates. Then another. By the time Morrison finished, 3 major networks had cameras rolling. The story was already viral. Within an hour, #VictoriaChin was trending worldwide. But Carlos noticed none of it. His attention fixed on one thing, the ambulance's fading sirens, carrying VictoriaChin toward either resurrection or a more private death. Morrison saw him watching. The hospital will call when there's news. You'll be there for her statement. This case lives or dies on your testimony. I know. Carlos's voice carried something heavy. That's what I'm afraid of. Afraid? You're a hero. He laughed, bitter and brief. I'm a felon with an assault record testifying against a billionaire and his doctor. Marcus Chen's lawyers will destroy me on the stand. They'll say I'm delusional, that I held a grudge against doctors after my conviction. He looked at his shackled hands. And they won't be completely wrong. Morrison stepped closer. Did you or did you not see those papers in Sterling's briefcase? I did. Did you or did you not recognize the compound and its effects? I did. Then you're not crazy. You're observant. She pulled out a card, pressed it into his palm. My direct number. When they come for you, and they will, you call me. Understand? They loaded Carlos back into the correctional van. As the doors closed, he caught one last glimpse of Victoria's open grave, that hole that should have held her living body. The van pulled away. Through the barred window, Carlos watched the cemetery shrink into the distance. He thought about the patient he'd failed 3 years ago, about the morgue drawer, about screams nobody heard. And he thought about VictoriaChin, fighting her way back from the edge of burial, her brain starved for oxygen, her muscles locked in chemical prison. Please wake up, he whispered. Please make this mean something. Because if she didn't, If the antidote failed, if she died in that hospital bed without ever speaking, then Marcus's lawyers would have their narrative ready. A delusional prisoner who caused chaos at a funeral, who spread conspiracy theories that drove an innocent man to breakdown. Carlos closed his eyes, feeling the van's motion, feeling the shackles' weight. Behind his lids, he saw that morgue drawer opening, saw the woman who should have lived, saw her eyes wide with cold and terror. He'd saved Victoria Chun from the grave. But saving her from what came next? That would require her to wake up and fight her own battle. And he had no idea if she had any fight left in her.
The hospital room smelt of antiseptic and desperatope. Victoria chaîne l'émotionless under white sheets, machine breeding for her, beeping her existence into the sterile air. Tube ran from her, arms like transparent vein. Margaret sat beside the bed, adente left in 16 hours. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, mascara long gone. She held Victoria's hand, whispering stories from their childhood. Doctor Patel, the hospital's chief toxicologist, entered with a clipboard. The atropine is working, but slowly. The paralytic was sophisticated, probably custom synthesized. She checked the monitor. Could be hours. Could be days. We are in uncharted territory here. What she didn't say was the other possibility. That Victoria might wake up bubbly unable to move, unable to speak, trapped in a body that no longer obeyed her command. Margaret squeezed her sisters on tighter, high physical pressure could pull her back. 40 miles away, in a Kuntijai holding cell, Carlos sat on a concrete bench. They moved him here pending furte investigation, kept him separate from general population for his own safety. Detective Morrison visited that evening, brewed coffee and a folder thick with documents. Marcus chaîne lawyer de within an hour, she said. Davis et associate. The firm that defended 3 Fortune 5 cents CEOs last year. They're already building their counter narrative. Carlos sipped the coffee. They expected this. Morrison opened the folder. They're saying you're delusional. That you have a documented history of paranoia episodes stemming from your previous conviction. They found a prison psychiatrist test note from 2 years ago when you had a breakdown. He was having nightmares, Carlos said quietly. About the woman who died. That is different from delusional. To a jury? Maybe not. Morrison pulled out more papers. They're also questioning how you could have seen Sterling's briefcase content from across a library. They have measurement. The distance was 32 feet. Carlos closed his eyes, remembering. He didn't read them from across the room. Sterling left his briefcase on a table when he went to inspect the infirmary. He walked past it. The papers were visible for maybe 10 seconds. Can you prove that timing? No. Carlos opened his eyes. Security camera don't cover that section. It's my word against his point. Morrison leaned forward. Then we need Victoria to wake up and confirm what happened. Without her testimony, this case falls apart. Carlos stood, passed the small cell HIS mind worked through possibility, through evidence, through the architecture of truth versus reasonable do. The syringe, he said suddenly. The one Sterling had at the cemetery. What was in it? Morrison flipped a page. Potassium chloride. Large dose. Would have stopped Victoria's at instantly if they injected her. She paused. But Sterling's lawyer's clin et grabbed it by mistake from his medical bag. He pulled it out and threatened people. He says he was trying to defend himself from an angry mob. Morrison's voice went flat. See how this works? They have an explanation for everything. Carlos sat back down, feeling the weight of it. There's something else, Morrison said, her tone shifting. We've been digging into Victoria's business. Chain technology was about to go public with evidence of a massive security breach. Someone had been selling encrypted client data to foreign buyers. The investigation pointed to internal theft. Carlos looked up sharply. Marcus. Victoria's team suspected him, but couldn't prove it. She hired forensic accountant, was about to present finding to the board. Morrison pulled out financial statement. If that information went public, Marcus wouldn't just lose the company. They face federal charge. 20 years minimum. The puzzle piece clicked together. Not just greed, Bu survival. Marcus Adente killed for inheritance alone. Aidé killed to bury evidence, to stop en investigation. Does Victoria's legal team know about this? Carlos Asked. They do now. He contacted her company's general counsel this morning. Morrison checked her watch. They refilling emergency motion to freeze all of Marcus's assets, block any access to company system. Unless Victoria wakes up and change her will. Exactly. Morrison may size. Which is why Marcus's lawyers are going to fight like hell to keep her declared legally dead or mentally incompetent. If she wakes up but can't communicate clearly, DLL argue she's brain damaged, unable to make legal decision. DLL push for Marcus to be appointed her medical guardian. The horror of it settled over Carlos like ice water. Victoria could survive the paralytic, wake up in her body, and still be trapped under Marcus's control. We can't let that happen, he said. Oui. Morrison raised an eyebrow. You're a prisoner awaiting trial on all charge, now a witness in a new case. What exactly do you think you can do? Carlos was for a long moment. Then, he need to talk to Victoria's sister. Margaret. She need to know what is coming. Morrison studied him. That is against protocol. Then the case is already lost. Carlos stood again. Marcus's lawyers are playing chess. We are playing checkers. Their three move red. Meanwhile, we are waiting for Victoria to wake up and hoping the truth is enough. HES voice rose. It won't be. Not without preparation. The detective said nothing for a long time. Then she pulled out her phone, typed something, showed Carlos the screen. It was a text thread with Margaret Chen. Morrison. The prisoner who saved your sister want to help prepare for what is coming. Technically, he can't allow contact. Unofficially, he can be bad at my job for 20 minutes. Margaret's response, when? Morrison looked at Carlos. Tomorrow morning. He'll bring her here. You'll have one conversation. Make it count. The next morning came sharp and early. Morrison brought Margaret into the holding cell's interview room. She looked worse than before, exhaustion carved into her face. But her eyes held something fierce. You saved my sister, she said immediately. I don't care what anyone says. You saved her. Carlos nodded. Now we need to protect her from what comes next. He lay it out for her, all of it. The legal strategy Marcus would use, the way they attack Victoria's competency, the emergency measure needed to secure her company and assets. Margaret listened, her expression hardening with each revelation. When Carlos finished, she pulled out her phone. Victoria's general counsel is James Park. Former federal prosecutor, brilliant, completely loyal to my sister. She started typing. I'm connecting you to True Detective Morrison. I need to hear everything you just told me. I'm a prisoner, Carlos said. My testimony is solid, Margaret interrupted. You know why? Because you have nothing to gain and everything to lose. You're not after money. You risked your life to save a stranger. Her voice cracked. That means something. Over the next 3 days, while Victoria lay silent in her hospital bed, a different kind of battle began. James Park filed motion faster than Marcus's team could count them. Emergency guardianship went to Margaret. Company assets were frozen. Board members who had been friendly to Marcus suddenly found themselves under scrutiny. The media storm intensified. Every network ran the story. Prisoner saves Billionaire became the narrative that resonated with something people wanted to believe.
On the 4th day, Victoria's finger moved. Not a twitch, but deliberate motion. Then her toe. Then her lips, forming soundless words. Dr. Patel called Margaret immediately. She's coming back. Slowly, but definitely. Her brain is reconnecting to her body. We might have speech within 48 hours. Margaret wept, called Morrison, who called Carlos with news that landed like light in his dark cell. She's waking up, Morrison said. And when she does, everything changes. Carlos closed his eyes, felt something loosen in his chest. But that night, as he lay in his cell, he heard footsteps. Multiple sets. Guards appeared at his door, faces grim. Reyes. You're being transferred. Where? They didn't answer. Just cuffed him, led him through corridors. Outside, a prison van waited. As they loaded him inside, Carlos caught a glimpse of a black sedan parked across the street. Through its tinted windows, he saw the outline of a man watching. The van's doors slammed shut. And as it pulled away, Carlos felt the pieces shifting again, felt the game changing into something darker. Marcus's lawyers weren't just building a defense. They were eliminating obstacles. And the prisoner who'd seen too much, who'd spoken too loud. He was an obstacle. The van drove into darkness, carrying Carlos toward a destination unknown, while behind him, in a hospital bed, Victoria Chen's eyes finally opened, searching for light in a world that had tried to bury her alive. The van drove for 30 minutes before stopping at a facility Carlos didn't recognize. The guards pulled him out roughly, led him through security doors, down corridors painted institutional beige. They threw him into a cell. Solitary. The door slammed with a finality that echoed in his bones. Carlos understood immediately. This wasn't a transfer. This was isolation. They were burying him the way they'd tried to bury Victoria, removing him from the narrative before he could testify. What Marcus didn't know was that Detective Morrison had seen the black sedan, had run the plates, had made calls. And what none of them knew was that Victoria Chun had opened her eyes. It happened at 3:47 a.m., 4 hours after Carlos's transfer. Margaret was dozing in the chair beside Victoria's bed when she heard a sound. A whisper. Garrett. Margaret's eyes snapped open. She lunged forward, gripping her sister's hand. Victoria? Oh God, Victoria, can you hear me? Victoria's eyes were open, unfocused but present. Her lips moved slowly. What happened? You were poisoned. Marcus tried to kill you. Margaret's tears fell freely. But you're alive. You're alive. Dr. Patel appeared within seconds. She checked Victoria's vitals, her pupils, her responses. Mrs. Chun, do you know where you are? Victoria's gaze sharpened slowly. Hospital. The word came clearer. I remember. Something cold. In my arm. Richard's face. Then, nothing. Darkness. Her breathing quickened. Was I in the casket? Yes, Margaret said, because lying would be worse. They were about to bury you. But someone stopped them. A prisoner named Carlos Reyes. He saw you were alive. Victoria's hand tightened on Margaret's with surprising strength. Where is he? Being held as a witness. He saved you, Victoria. He risked everything. Victoria's eyes closed, but not from weakness. From rage. When they opened again, something fierce burned there. Get James Park, she said, voice growing stronger. Get him now. And get every board member on a call. Marcus doesn't get to walk away from this. Within an hour, Victoria's hospital room transformed into a war room. James Park arrived with 2 associates and a laptop. Board members joined via secure video conference, their faces shocked. Marcus Chun attempted to murder me, Victoria said without preamble. Dr. Richard Sterling administered a paralytic compound designed to mimic death. They planned to bury me and claim my company. I want criminal charges. I want asset seizure. And I want Marcus's accomplices inside Chun Technologies identified and removed. The board members sat in stunned silence. Then questions erupted. Victoria cut through it all. I don't care about optics. I care about justice. Someone tried to put me in the ground conscious. That man is going to prison for the rest of his life. James Park leaned forward. Victoria, there's something else. The prisoner who saved you, Carlos Reyes, was transferred to an undisclosed facility 4 hours ago. Someone with pull is keeping him isolated. Victoria's expression went cold. Marcus is trying to silence him. Most likely. Without Carlos's testimony about seeing the documents in Sterling's briefcase, the prosecution's case gets weaker. Then we find Carlos, Victoria said flatly. Whatever it takes. He spoke up when no one else would. I'm not leaving him to rot in some hole because he was inconvenient to my husband's defense strategy. Margaret pulled out her phone. Detective Morrison has been trying to track him. She said the transfer was irregular. Victoria's jaw clenched. Get me Morrison's number. Now. The call connected within minutes. Morrison's voice came through the speaker. Mrs. Chun. I'm glad you're awake. We have a problem. I know. Carlos Reyes disappeared into the system. Find him. I'm trying. But I need leverage. Morrison paused. There's something else. We intercepted communications between Marcus's legal team and the facility. They're planning to claim Carlos is mentally unstable, that he needs psychiatric evaluation and medication. They're going to drug him into incompetence before trial. The room went silent. Victoria's hands gripped the bed rails. Over my dead body, she said quietly. Which is exactly what they already tried. James Park started typing rapidly. I can file emergency motions, habeas corpus, demand immediate production of the witness. But it'll take time, maybe days. We don't have days. Victoria looked at Margaret. Call every media contact you have. Every reporter who covered the funeral. Tell them Carlos Reyes is missing, that the star witness in my attempted murder is being silenced. Make it a story they can't ignore. Margaret nodded, already dialing. Victoria turned to the video conference. And I want a press conference. Tomorrow morning. I'm going public with everything. Marcus wanted to bury the truth with my body. Instead, I'm going to broadcast it to the world. The next 12 hours moved with the speed of avalanche. Margaret's calls to reporters triggered a media frenzy. By dawn, every major network was running stories. Star witness missing in billionaire murder plot. Social media exploded. Hashtag Find Carlos Reyes trended worldwide. The public pressure was immediate and crushing. Within 6 hours, the mystery facility was identified by online investigators. Sacramento County Psychiatric Hold. Detective Morrison showed up at the facility with a federal warrant, 2 FBI agents, and a camera crew that somehow learned the location at exactly the right time. They found Carlos in a bare room, restrained to a bed, and 4 in his arm. He was conscious but foggy, fighting against medication. Carlos Reyes? Morrison said, showing her badge. You're being released into federal custody. Now. The FBI agents were already removing the restraints, pulling the 4. Carlos blinked slowly, trying to focus. Detective. His voice slurred. What did they give me? Something to keep you quiet. It didn't work. Morrison helped him sit up. Victoria Chun is alive and awake. And she's looking for you. Carlos's eyes cleared slightly. She woke up. She woke up angry. And she's about to burn Marcus's entire world down. But she needs you there to watch it happen. They got Carlos into a wheelchair, rolled him out past cameras that captured everything, the restraints, the 4 marks, his disoriented state. The optics were devastating. Marcus's defense team tried damage control immediately, but the video footage told a different story. And when that footage went viral, public opinion solidified into something Marcus Chen's money couldn't buy back. The press conference happened at 10 a.m. the next morning. Victoria sat in a wheelchair, still weak but present, Margaret on one side and James Park on the other. Carlos sat nearby, mostly recovered from the medication. The hospital conference room was packed. Every media outlet, every reporter. Cameras everywhere. Victoria spoke without notes. 6 days ago, my husband Marcus Chen and my doctor Richard Sterling poisoned me with a paralytic compound designed to make me appear dead. Their goal was simple: bury me before anyone could detect the truth, claim my company and my assets, and erase evidence of massive fraud Marcus had committed. She paused. They almost succeeded. I was in my casket, minutes from being lowered into the ground, when Carlos Reyes, a prisoner working cemetery grounds, recognized the signs of paralytic poisoning. He stopped my burial. He saved my life. And for that act of courage, Marcus's legal team had him transferred to a psychiatric facility, medicated against his will, and hidden from the investigation. Murmurs rippled through the room. Cameras zoomed in on Carlos. Victoria continued. I'm here today to say several things. First, I'm filing criminal charges against Marcus Chen and Richard Sterling for attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and witness tampering. Second, I'm personally funding Carlos Reyes's legal defense and working to have his prior conviction reviewed. Third, I'm offering a $1 million reward for information leading to the identification of anyone else involved in this conspiracy. The room erupted with questions. Victoria raised her hand for silence. Fourth, and most important, I want everyone watching this to understand something. The truth survived because someone powerless chose to speak it. Carlos had everything to lose and nothing to gain. He spoke anyway. That's not heroism. That's humanity. And if we live in a world where that kind of humanity is rare enough to be remarkable, then we need to fix the world, not praise the exception. She looked directly at Carlos. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for speaking when silence would have been safer. I owe you my life, and I will spend the rest of it making sure your courage wasn't wasted. Carlos met her eyes, nodded once. The press conference ended, but the damage to Marcus was complete. Within hours, additional witnesses came forward. Chen Technologies employees who'd suspected fraud. Medical supply companies that had filled suspicious orders. Even Marcus's own lawyer leaked information to distance himself. The trial was scheduled for 3 months later. But everyone knew the verdict was already written. When the trial finally began, it lasted only 6 days. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Marcus showed no emotion as the verdict was read. But when the judge sentenced him to life without parole, something cracked in his face. Not remorse, but the final recognition that he'd lost everything by trying to take everything. Carlos testified for 4 hours, calm and detailed. Marcus's lawyers tried to shake him, questioned his mental state, his criminal history, his motives. But Carlos didn't break. He simply told the truth, and the truth had physical evidence to back it up. When it was over, when Marcus was led away in chains, Victoria found Carlos in the courthouse hallway. "It's done," she said simply. Carlos nodded. "Justice. Actual justice. I wasn't sure I'd ever see it. You made it possible." Victoria handed him an envelope. "Your prior conviction is being reviewed by the state attorney general. The case against you was built on a doctor's testimony claiming you were irrational. That doctor has since been sanctioned for 3 other incidents. The conviction will likely be overturned." Carlos opened the envelope, saw legal documents that meant freedom, that meant his name cleared. His hands shook. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept the job offer." Victoria smiled. Chen Technologies needs a director of crisis response and medical ethics. Someone who knows how to see what others miss. Someone who speaks truth regardless of cost. The position pays $200,000 annually, plus benefits. Carlos stared at her. "I'm a convicted felon with a high school diploma and paramedic certification. You're the man who saved my life. Everything else is just details." Victoria extended her hand. "What do you say?" Carlos looked at that hand, at the woman who'd been dead and was now offering him resurrection too. He thought about the patient he'd failed 3 years ago, about the morgue drawer, about all the voices that go unheard. He shook her hand. "I say yes."
2 years passed like seasons changing, transforming landscape that had seemed permanent. Carlos Reyes stood in his office on the 18th floor of Chen Technology, looking out over the city. The view was different from up here. He could see the bridge where he used to sleep, a concrete shadow in the distance that reminded him daily of how thin the line between visibility and invisibility really was. HIS conviction had been overturned after 9 months. The state had issued a formal apology, paid restitution. But Carlos knew the truth. Without Victoria's resource, without her determination, he'd still be in prison, his voice dismissed, his knowledge wasted. The Crisis Response Department had built had grown to 12 people. Formés paramedics, nurses, social workers. People who knew how to see what others missed. They prevented 3 potential workplaces that in the past year alone. Carlos had trained them all in one fundamental principle: believe the person no one else believe. Listen to the voice everyone else dismiss. Because sometimes the truth lives in unexpected place. HIS phone buzzed. A text from Victoria, board meeting in 10. You representing the new ethic protocol. Carlos smiled slightly, Sti getting used to this version of his life. Et grabe his table, and dead to conference room. Victoria was already there, looking nothing like the woman who'd been wheeled into a press conference 2 years ago. She sold off 2 divisions of chain technology, streamlined operation, refocused the company on ethical security practice. The stock had dropped initially, then soared when clients realized they were dealing with a CEO who valued integrity over profit margin. She also testified before Congress about corporate fraud, became an advocate for criminal justice reform, fin d'être très non-profit focused on wrongful conviction case. The woman who almost been buried alive had decided to spend a resurrection digging other out of their own grave. Ready? She asked Carlos a other board members filled in. Always. The presentation went well. Carlos laid out new protocol for internal whistleblowing, protection for employee who reported ethical concern, mandatory review process that couldn't be overridden by executive pressure. The board approved everything unanimously. Afterward, Victoria pulled Carlos aside. There's something you should know. Marcus filed for parole eligibility review. Carlos felt his jaw tighten. After 2 years. HIS lawyers found a technicality. The motion will likely be denied, but there will be a hearing. You and he will need to testify. Victoria's expression was unreadable. How do you feel about that? Carlos considered the question seriously. 2 years ago, the thought of facing Marcus again would have filled him with rage. Now, he feel like he want him to see what he failed to destroy. He want him to see US boat thriving. Maybe that is petty. Maybe that is human. Victoria smiled. He'll be there with you. The parole hearing happened 6 weeks later in a grey institutional room. Marcus looked smaller than Carlos remember, his expansive surreplaced with prison khaki, his arrogance eroded by 2 years of accountability. When Marcus testified, his voice was key, practiced. He made terrible mistake. He was consumed by jealousy and greed. He had 2 years to reflect on what he did, to understand the harm he caused. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for the chance to prove he changed. HIS lawyer presented letters from prison counselor, educational certificate, evidence of good behavior. It was a compelling performance. Then Victoria testified. She spoke calmly about the paralytic taking hold, about the darkness, about waking up in a casket with the last conscious thought being that her husband had poured there. About the amount of physical therapy, the nightmares that stick am some team, the fundamental violation of trust. Marcus didn't just try to kill me, she said. He tried to erase me. To take my company, my voice, my very existence and replace it with history. That is not a crime of passion or a moment of weakness. That is calculated erasure. And 2 years of prison class don't undo that calculation. When Carlos testified, he kept it simple. He spent 2 years helping build a system that protect people from what Marcus did. System that listen to voices that might otherwise be ignored. Every day, he sees the ripple effect of what happened when power try to silence truth. He looked directly at Marcus. You talked me something important. You talked me that the cost of silence is always higher than the cost of speaking. I'll carry that lesson for the rest of my life. I hope you carry your in à l'olongé. The parole board deliberated for 30 minutes. The need. Marcus would serve this full sentence, eligible for review again in 5 years. A day left the hearing, Victoria and Carlos walked through the prison parking lot in silence. Finally, Victoria spoke. Do you think people can really change? Carlos thought about the question. I think people can change their circumstance and call it personal growth. Marcus is behaving better because prison give him no choice. But fundamental change? That require actually confronting what you did, not just regretting that you got caught. He paused. He changed because he had to look at what my silence cost someone else. Until Marcus does that, really does that, et is just performing rehabilitation. Victoria nodded. That is what he thought too. He just needed to hear someone else say it. They drove back to city together, talking about upcoming project, new initiative, normal things that felt extraordinary because they were alive to discuss them. 3 months later, Carlos met someone. Her name was Dr. Sarah Lynn, en emergency room physician who understood the weight of life and death decision, who recognized in Carlos' eyes the particular exhaustion of someone who they seen too much too young. They went on careful that, shared careful stories, built something careful that slowly became solid. Victoria attended their wedding a year later, giving a toast that made everyone laugh and several people cry. Carlos saved my life, she said, raising her glass. But more than that, he saved my faith in people. He proved that courage isn't about having nothing to lose. It's about risking what little you have because someone else need it more. Sarah, you're marrying a genuine hero. Et elle deny it constantly. Don't let him. Carlos did deny it, in his brief speech afterward. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who saw something wrong and said something. That should be normal, not exceptional. The fact that it's not tell you everything about what we need to fix. The applause that followed felt like agreement. Victoria herself never remarried. She dated occasionally, but found that most people interested in Billionaire were interested in the billion, not the person. She didn't mind. Her life felt full enough without romance. Fille with work that mattered, relationship that meant something, purpose that didn't require someone else's validation.
She did, however, start a foundation. The Reyes-Chin Initiative for Wrongful Conviction Review. It funded legal teams, forensic re-examination of evidence, support for exonerees trying to rebuild lives after imprisonment. In its first 2 years, the foundation helped overturn 17 convictions, freed 9 innocent people, brought attention to systemic failures that had buried truth under bureaucracy. Every person freed got the same offer Carlos had received: help rebuilding your life, no strings attached, no public appearances required. Just support, because support should be a right, not a reward for good optics. On the 3rd anniversary of Victoria's near burial, she and Carlos met at the cemetery. Not for ceremony, just for private acknowledgement. They stood at the grave that had almost held her, now just an empty plot with grass growing over it. I still have nightmares, Victoria admitted. About the darkness. About being aware but unable to move. Sometimes I wake up panicking, convinced I'm still in the casket. I have them too, Carlos said. Different nightmares. About the woman I couldn't save before you. About arriving too late, speaking too quietly, not being believed. He looked at the empty grave. But then I remember I was believed. You heard me. Everyone heard me. And it mattered. Victoria touched his arm. It mattered because you spoke. That's the part you keep minimizing. You had every reason to stay silent. You were a prisoner. No one would have blamed you for keeping your head down, serving your time, staying invisible. But you didn't. Neither did you, Carlos countered. You could have settled quietly, taken your life back, moved on. Instead, you made it loud. You made it matter beyond just you. They stood in comfortable silence, 2 people who'd been dead in different ways and chosen to make their resurrections count for something. What do you think Marcus is doing right now? Victoria asked. Probably planning his next parole attempt. Rehearsing the right words. Believing that if he performs remorse convincingly enough, he can skip actually feeling it. Do you hate him? Carlos considered. No. I pity him. He had everything and threw it away because he couldn't imagine that everything might not be enough for his ego. That's not evil. That's just sad. Victoria smiled. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I just spent a lot of time with nothing, so I learned what actually matters. He turned to face her. Thank you. For believing me. For fighting for me. For making my voice count when I'd spent 3 years being told it didn't. Thank you for using it when it would have been easier not to. They left the cemetery together, drove to Chen Technologies, went back to work building systems that protected people who needed protecting, amplifying voices that needed amplifying, proving that the best revenge against those who try to bury truth is to live so loudly that silence becomes impossible. 5 years after the funeral that never was, Victoria gave a TED Talk that went viral. She spoke about power, about silence, about the systems that protect the privileged and bury the vulnerable. She ended with a challenge. Everyone watching this has heard a truth they didn't speak. Seen something wrong they didn't address. Watched injustice happen and chosen comfort over courage. I'm not judging you. I've done it too. But I'm asking you to remember something. The person who saved my life had every reason to stay silent. He spoke anyway. Not because he was extraordinary, but because the moment required it and he refused to let the moment pass. She paused. Let that sink in. The world doesn't need more heroes. It needs more people willing to be uncomfortable. To speak when silence is safer. To believe the unbelievable because sometimes the unbelievable is just the truth wearing unexpected clothes. The talk had 40 million views within a month. It sparked conversations, inspired changes, made people think about their own moments of silence. But Carlos didn't watch it until weeks later, when Sarah insisted. They sat together on their couch, her hand in his, as Victoria's voice filled their small apartment. When it ended, Sarah looked at him. You changed the world. You know that, right? Carlos shook his head. I stopped one funeral. Victoria changed the world. You stopped one funeral, Sarah corrected, and proved that one person speaking truth can shift everything. That's not small, Carlos. That's everything. Maybe she was right. Maybe the ripples from that day at the cemetery had spread farther than he could see, touching lives he'd never meet, inspiring courage in people who felt powerless. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe he'd just seen something wrong and said something, and maybe that's all any of us can do. 10 years after Victoria's near burial, both she and Carlos were invited to speak at a criminal justice reform conference. They shared the stage, took questions together, told their story in alternating voices. A young woman in the audience raised her hand during Q&A. Do you ever regret speaking up? She asked Carlos. Knowing what it cost you, the transfer, the medication, the risk? Carlos answered without hesitation. The only thing I regret is the time I didn't speak up. The patient I lost before Victoria. That's the cost I carry. Speaking up? That was the cheapest thing I ever did, and it bought more than I could have imagined. The applause was immediate, sustained. But Carlos wasn't looking at the audience. He was looking at Victoria, who nodded once, understanding passing between them that needed no words. They'd both been buried by different people for different reasons. They'd both clawed their way back to light. And they'd both decided that the best use of resurrection was helping others do the same. That was the story. Not hero saves billionaire. Not prisoner against the system. Just two people who refused to let silence win, who chose truth over comfort, who proved that sometimes the grave isn't the end, it's just the beginning of something that matters more. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the truths you haven't spoken or the voices you haven't believed, then subscribe to this channel. Because everyone deserves to be heard, everyone deserves to be believed, and everyone deserves a chance to rise from whatever tried to bury them. The question isn't whether you'll face that moment. It's whether you'll have the courage to speak when it comes.